Morning, guys. So I'm actually now back from my trip. I've had a couple of days of just playing catch up, really. And in essence, what I've tried to do, if you guys already follow us in Discord and you're already subscribers, you'll know that I've done a few more private streams, for you guys. I guess where we are at the moment is we're at this, I would guess, some kind of critical point in terms of Bitcoin. So although I'm putting some emphasis on it, I know Paul is still doing the daily streams. I I'm looking at this in terms of where we are, kind of big picture, and then looking for that kind of early signs in terms of some kind of entry, right? So although people might say, we kind of bearish on Bitcoin, it's not really true. It's not really the case. I think all I've tried to do over this last year, and since making a lot of my Bitcoin calls public, I've tried to put the emphasis on the reality of the situation, right? So, where I guess everybody were looking for moon calls, everybody was looking for, why we can go to 275K or beyond. I think the reality is, I've highlighted this over and over and over again. And not only have I kept this, for the subscribers, I've put this out in the public kind of time and time and time again, right? Going all the way back, this was December 2020. I'm just going to re-emphasize really what I've said throughout this, right? I'll put a link to this, in the description below, right? So, in essence, I was talking about the correlation, how you could see Bitcoin basically becoming institutionalized, way back then, right? I talked about the reaccumulation, so I'm just going to click on some of these, right? I've talked about this reaccumulation phase and where we were, back. This was January 2021. Why I was expecting the move to do what it was doing, collect before ultimately moving on up. This was the situation. This was what I was expecting. Where we were going and kind of why, right? Where the value areas were, where you see this new territory 44K, right? And this was back when we were down at 32, right? Now the reason for all of this and the reason for why I think it was doing what it was doing, you'll have to then look at where we went to and why that 40K, the 44, 42K level was actually quite, useful, right? Now, I'm going to flip out of that and come back to, let's come back out to this a second. So from there, right, this was on the way up. This was last year, right? And this was actually the first, let's go back onto a weekly. So this was actually back, 2021, January 2021. Let's find where we were there. And you'll actually see why that 42, 40K level, let's put this in a box. So 44K roughly where we are there, and then why 42 roughly there, right? You see this level was tagged there before the drop, right? So for me, this was a good sign very early on in terms of that becoming institutionalized, right? It was becoming respectful to these kinds of zones and levels, right? Now, I'm not going to go into details in terms of what they are and why. This was already covered, like I said, in this post, and beyond, right? So if you look at where we were then, and then what we started doing, right? Let's find that post again. So what we started doing from there was gathering evidence really in terms of why, where, and what we were therefore likely to do next, right? I then made some public posts again in February, done the same thing in March, and just highlighted why I believed these levels were becoming important, right? You'll see by the title, Institutional Bitcoin, right? Highlighting these moves as to why we were doing what we were doing, right? Where we were going. And all I was getting at the time was, Bitcoin's not going back there. That's never going to happen. Look at this. We've hit the 60K. And you just have to play this forward and you'll see how important, how critical these levels are, right? You'll see this being now the accumulation phase before we go back up again, right? You'll see this being used time and time again. Okay, watch this. Now, if, at 50K, it was never going back there. 60K was never going back there. When we got to 60K a second time, it's never going back to 36K. And you'll actually see, these levels being used time and time again, right? Now, for me, this is what I would regard as the fair value or fair market value in the grand scheme of things, right? We then fast forward into March. This was the rocket call. I don't need to click on this. You can see from the 18th of March, you can see we had the move down, exactly kind of as predicted. 4 to 5 now was ultimately the truncated 5, new all-time high. And that was actually taking us then towards the end of March, where I was seeing basically the weekly 5, monthly 3. And that is what we actually had truncated, right? So that was the bit I was expecting that to go a little bit higher than we got before coming down for this now monthly 4 in terms of where we are, right? So you can see from this, all we did was come into that zone. We played around the fair value level, right? Almost to perfection. We've gone back up, like I said, we had a truncated 5, right? So this one, I was expecting to go up a little bit, another 10K realistically, and we didn't get it, right? We then had the distribution phase again. I've even covered this in terms of the Wyckoff logic, on Tradingview, so that's all free. Lots of different education, and I suppose overall, the message that I'm trying to get across, right, which might not be too good, is I'm feeling now that this has become very institutional, right? And therefore, a lot of the perception and the sentiment is that big boys come in, price goes up. What you have to remember, right, and I can't stress this enough, is that the bigger the players in the game, the harder the game becomes for the little players. Okay. And therefore, understanding why we do what we do will kind of serve you better in the long run than looking for a do I buy now, do I sell now? And that's all you're looking for, especially when you're putting so much emphasis with poor risk management on these types of trades, right? You can see from the levels, you can see, this is going into September the 30th. Look, right, I put this level here. I talked about this with my group as to why this was a key level we'd never explored before in terms of Bitcoin, okay? You fast forward only a month. I put this in there somewhere. You fast forward only a month. This is now October the 27th, and you can see what we did on those levels, right? That for me is not, hey, look at this and look how good we've done. That's just emphasizing how respectful Bitcoin is becoming. Okay. So what I want to do as well is just again maybe emphasize this particular chart is very important on a personal scale. This is something that I feel a lot of people lack in terms of understanding. Now, COT or commitment of traders is basically the situation of the big players. The big players, it's a big enough sample size, right? This is a US based sample size where they have to report their current positions over the week period prior to the report being released, right? So it's basically reported on a Tuesday, released on a Friday. And this information is basically saying what and where, what situation, what positions a lot of the big players in the US are actually reporting for the week right now. Or although there's dark pools and other bits and pieces that make this a little bit harder in terms of the clarity of it, you have got a big enough sample size to understand the situation, right? Now, when I started posting some information around the Bitcoin COT, because I've used this for Forex and other markets over the years and kind of shared that. But when I started sharing this on Bitcoin, the kind of retail sentiment I was getting was BTC short, right? This move here. And ultimately Bitcoin was moving long. And what you have to ask yourself is if the big boys are selling and the retail are buying, what are you likely to expect? right? This is profit taking for the institutional player. And this is where the red bags are created for the retail player. Okay. So it's almost like thinking of this as a contrarian and understanding the situation to profit from the situation, right? Now, this move short was as we were getting a truncated 5 on that move, right? On the bigger move that I've talked about, way back when. Okay. So as that spike was going up in terms of shorts, we were getting this move here, right? So for me, that is wholesale selling to retail at a premium. That's the beauty of it. Okay. Now, coming into the more local setup and structure, there's a couple of things that I've put out there and I guess, emphasize. For me, monthly 3, this candle here, right? I'm not going to go back into, why I think. It's just what I'm believing, right? Now, when you look at the overall situation, there's a couple of possibilities, right? And for me, there's 2 that kind of stick out, right? Now, my least preferred is that we've got an A, a B, and a C, which makes an A, right? We would then have an A, a B, and a C, which would make a B, and this actually falls at about 100% of this first swing. Okay, so in essence, it's good enough to be classed as. The only problem with that is that you'd now be seeing this is going to be a flat type move potentially, or at least the first if we don't go into a combo. And therefore you'd expect the 5 move down, right? So you'd have a 1, 2, probably longer 3, 4, 5 into liquidity. And that would actually create then the C if this was a B, C. Okay, so still very plausible. I'm not a fan on it, but it's possible. Okay, so that's one of the options that we've got there, right? Now, I've covered a lot of these different scenarios in a couple of the streams I've done recently for subscribers. I've also covered some of this in the moves, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Tradingview. And I was looking at this particular move being, the floor, right, to start with, if this was coming down for an A into some liquidity, right? But the same would be applicable if this was already the A. You'd have the A of the A, and then you'd obviously the A of the B. Then you'd actually have the B of the B, followed by then the C. So for me, we didn't quite get up to this kind of level, right? This is where, if we were expecting that, I think realistically, we would have then classified that as the B, right? I'd like to see 1, 2, or 3 as a B target. If we come down from here, it's going to be more justification that the B is not quite complete, right? And therefore, it's back to my preferred scenario of that now being something like this, where we have the 5 or the 3 monthly. We would have in a 1 or an a B, a C. This comes back into the liquidity for the D. Then we come down for an E, making the larger scale A. Then we go up A, B, C, right? And there's a lot of reasons why I think just above the 50K for that. That to me would make the B. And then we would come down from a higher situation in that same 5 wave, because you'd be going 5, 3, 5 in a zigzag type move, right? So that way you still come down possibly similar levels. I'd say, 23 to 28 is probably the zone. Okay, so that's kind of the area where I feel all we're doing is making a larger scale schematic where you'd expect the spring and then ultimately the move up to new all-time highs, right? And you're going to get them because if this is indeed the monthly 3 and a monthly 4, a monthly 5 is what you'd expect, even if you had some kind of truncated move on that 5, you're going to be coming beyond that in terms of a monthly move, right? You're going to get, even if it's just above, you're going to get probably the 80k plus that I'd said about in the roadmap back last year. Okay, so for me, one way or another, nothing's really changed. Hence the reason that a lot of my posts and streams recently have been, relaxed Bitcoin. I've done this from the slopes. I've kind of played around with it because this is just becoming more and more institutionalized. There's nothing really that's pressing, nothing really exciting. Don't feel like I'm missing anything out at the moment in terms of the situation. Everything that I've covered in these posts over the last year is kind of playing itself out, right? So I don't feel right now it's the time to be buying. I'm not really one for shorting Bitcoin. I do believe in the product, in the actual technology. I've been in this space an awful long time from both a professional investor and ultimately venture capitalist in the technology side, as well as ultimately 20 odd years on the trading side and buying Bitcoin since 2011. So I guess the thing is for me, I'm not really missing anything right now. I'm quite happy with the situation. I think the situation is playing itself out as it should, and therefore I kind of feel confident and comfortable that where we are right now is whether or not we make the C and that's done. Price action will tell us when we get there whether or not that is done and we're ready for that buy. I've already said that even if that's not the case, I might have a little play with the A to B move any which way because we are on a monthly time frame and therefore you got a lot more probability in terms of the move up from the new kind of liquidity grab. And then eventually, if we do get this move back down, I'm just gonna go back into it at that point. So the general idea is to take a pretty relaxed view on the move, whether it's another week, another month, another 3 months. It's only buying that I want from the situation rather than trying to short the market in its current circumstance. Okay, so although from a shorter time frame, that's not what people want right now. As a professional trader, you kind of have the luxury of waiting for these kinds of moves for higher probability. You can go in obviously with a bigger account, and at that particular point, it's enough. It's that's kind of the point in terms of doing this professionally. You don't need to be at the screen 24/7. Okay, so I guess for me, one other thing I wouldn't mind showing is in terms of the advanced get software. I'm going to finish off with this, right? So in terms of the advanced get software, there's a couple of little things that just emphasize what I've just said, right? We have the 3 at this level there. Okay, let me just draw this in. So we have the 3, and I'm on a monthly chart at the moment. We have the 4, which suggests that it's not quite in yet. Now, on this move down, you could say there's your 1, there's your 2, so there's your A, there's your B, and there's your C, right? Which would kind of give way to this already being the A already in, right? Now, I could agree with the software there and say, okay, let's assume that the least preferred option is currently the option in terms of the software, right? I'm going to drop down into a weekly and I'm going to look at this and say to myself, right, there's a couple of reasons I don't like this particular move. And part of me is kind of going against the software in this move, specifically due to this 1 and 2, right? Now, I like to look at 2 to the left and 2 to the right in terms of candles, and therefore my 1 is there, my 2 is there, and ultimately 2 to the left and 2 to the right being the low. This does indeed bring me my 3, okay? Now, if that's the case, we can go A, B, C, right? And this being then the 4, potentially, if it's already in, coming down for a 5. Doesn't have to be deep, just into liquidity to grab underneath, some kind of double bottom is good enough. We might get into the zone, which would cover something like this over there. So into this little zone here. And then ultimately that's the optimal buy-in opportunity in terms of this particular move. Okay. So that's what I'm seeing at the moment. That's why for me, I don't feel the A is in. I kind of feel there's more to this. And as I said earlier on in the video, the big boys coming in does not equate price going up. They want to be buying at wholesale prices from guys carrying red bags right now. Okay, so this is more about the pain points, the time frame aspect, and ultimately dragging this out is nothing to the big boys. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like that for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next streams.